All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Nyc Griff Show. Today is January 29th. Let's go ahead and do our quick market check. Joe, what do you think here of the S&P and Bitcoin as of today? We're sitting at Bitcoin 38 and some change. The S&P is at 43.30 or 44.31. What do you think about these charts here?
For sure. Yeah. So, I mean, if you want to look at the last, like a couple of days or even the last week time frame, a lot of the people that I've been listening to have been echoing this, but Bitcoin is behaving more like a risk on asset than anything else. You saw moving into the Federal Open Market Committee meeting that they were being very hawkish, right? They were, saying that they were going to raise rates, 6 times. People were projecting 9 times. Naturally, because of that, you're going to see people, drop out of risk on assets like equities. But that's what happened in preparation for the Fed meeting, right? You saw basically Bitcoin, move entirely in the direction of the S&P and, big equity indexes. And now as the S&P is recovering, Bitcoin's also recovering. Like here and there are very small dislocations, but, from what you can see, like Bitcoin is behaving very much like a risk on asset. It's still very much connected to equities. We'll see how it behaves, in the coming months, should the Fed actually hike rates. But that's yet to be seen. We're still right around 38. I'm, more than happy to toss my entire paycheck into Bitcoin still. I'm an eternal buyer. So.
Yeah, buddy. Griff, what are your thoughts?
As always, it's just one Bitcoin is one Bitcoin. So we're doing pretty good. I think we're holding steady to that. I don't know if that's changed. Is anybody aware that that's changed the effort? So I think we're doing pretty good. I think it is interesting, as he was talking about like the Fed being hawkish and kind of how all the markets moved. I was just talking to, and this is not a shitcoin podcast, but I was just talking to my cousin who he loves Bitcoin, but he invests in the altcoins. And we just looked at our Let's Go Brandon token yesterday because I told him like months ago that I would like buy some because he wanted to buy some, which I hated. I literally told him, I was like, dude, this isn't even like Shiba. Like it doesn't even have the same steam behind it. Like I don't even think this is like a relatively good idea. And yesterday he had, I don't want to say the full numbers, but it was a large sum of money, was worth $52 yesterday. And so I was like, so are you just going to put it all in Bitcoin now? Or are you going to finally listen? Or like, what's the situation here? But no, it's interesting. I think it'll be interesting to see what Bitcoin does in 2022 with all of the different factors at play, obviously. So,
well, guys, if you haven't been able to tell yet here, we have got a new third person here on the episode today, Joe Consorti. I did pronounce that correct, yeah?
Yeah.
I probably don't have the Italian twang on it like you may have, but yeah, hey, like we always say, man, we like to talk with people. We like to get on Twitter. We like to hang out with the Twitter Bitcoin army. Hey, if you're down to have a conversation, you can be in Joe's seat, and we're excited to have him on today. He's got kind of a cool story as far as where he's at right now and where he's headed. He's written a couple of articles for Bitcoin Magazine, which Griff, I don't know, did you read the second one? I know you read one of them. I finished both of those this morning.
I was able to read The American Dream is Dying one, which I liked a lot because I feel like that's something that when me and Nick originally started talking about this, I was already a little bit further ahead than Nick, just in literal sheer time of like how long I had been studying Bitcoin. Nick might be actually faster than me when it comes to like getting this information going quicker. But I love that article about the American Dream is dying and Bitcoin's kind of like here to save it because I think it is. But we could definitely let Joe kind of introduce himself here. Joe, like tell the podcast kind of who you are, kind of like we talked about on the phone the other day and what you're here to talk about.
For sure. Yeah. Well, first things first, I appreciate you guys having me. This is my first Bitcoin centric podcast appearance. I got hosted on like some kind of meme review 2 months ago, which was pretty cool. Like completely unsolicited, but I'm happy to be here and sort of talk all things Bitcoin. So yeah, no, I'm a student. I'm still in college. I'm 20 years old. Over the last 2 years, starting in just before March of 2020, I ran my own small business. I did $100,000 in revenue over one summer when I was 18. Then the following summer, I scaled out my business, hired people to work underneath me, scaled it all across Massachusetts. I was on the South Shore. I was in Western Mass. I was just west of Boston. And then I ended up doing $250,000 in revenue in this last year when I was 19. And then this year, I got orange pilled by a buddy of mine. He works at Bitcoin Inc., Tyler LaRoche, at Tyler LaRoche _ on Twitter. He's a buddy of mine from school. And, I sort of got sent down the rabbit hole this summer after I did my first leg of my business. And it's sort of, I haven't looked back since, no subject has ever got me to sit down and stare at screens and look at charts and try to understand, the futures market, try to understand the history of money. So this is the first asset that's, made me do that. I've gone ahead and written papers for various classes. One paper in particular, I wrote for one of my professors, named Professor Andrei Yukov. He's a very intelligent guy. He noted that, it was one of the better papers he's read. And so I decided to, publish it as an op-ed on Bitcoin Magazine. And thankfully they accepted it. Those guys are awesome. It's called The American Dream is Dying. Bitcoin's Monetary Policy Can Save It. I've written another one since. I'm continuing to write for them. And then, in the very near future here, I'm studying for my securities exams as well as finishing my last semester of school. So got a lot on my plate right now, but 1 year long time frame. Goal is to get my securities licenses down and begin working as an associate for a Bitcoin centered hedge fund. So all pretty cool. That's a little bit about me.
So that sounded even cooler on the podcast than it did on the phone the other day. So I wanted to ask on the phone the other day, what's it like, making a lot of money being in school? Because me and Nick were athletes, so we had no money. we really didn't have the option to make a lot of money. So what's it like, being kind of a successful entrepreneur going to school? Like, is it kind of weird? Because when I was in school, I didn't. What are you majoring in? Something specifically?
I am, yeah. I'm majoring in finance and economics.
So how is it majoring in finance and economics, where I'd assume at this point, when it comes to Bitcoin and real world knowledge, you probably disagree with some of your professors and probably some of your fellow students quite a bit, I would assume. But what's it like being in school, kind of with where you're at with Bitcoin and kind of with where you're at in life, honestly?
For sure. Yeah. So sort of, I'll answer the first part first. Running two successful businesses, I don't view it as having a lot of money. I've put, the majority of what I've earned into Bitcoin. The rest I hold in cash to, pay for my expenses. This way, I don't need to, get capital gains tax every time I draw out some Bitcoin from River, like Cash App or something, because I need to pay for, a sandwich, right? So I keep some cash on hand. But, at the end of the day, it's like, I'm just trying to leverage the fact that I did that and the fact that I'm still pretty young. That's really all I'm trying to do. I still got my head down. I'm not, going out and I'm literally like wearing, this is my high school soccer jacket. It still fits me. I'm wearing like this old lifeguard shirt. Like I don't buy anything. I think I'm the most frugal person living in my house. So there's that. But I also think that like with the amount of, studying I have to do in my own time, and I'm also generally active on Twitter and stuff, and there are so many smart people around me, and everybody's always so intelligent. The people I interact with, I try to interface with as many intelligent people as possible on a daily basis. So it's like it's difficult to go into school and have everything sort of spoon fed and not necessarily something you can do at your own pace, because I'll sit down and I'll read a book, and I'll try to read, half of a book in an evening before I go to sleep and read the other half when I wake up, or vice versa. But then I'll go into class, and, one of the classes I'm in now, which I'm in all honesty probably going to drop, is run by somebody who, demands your attention for 2 hours. But basically all this lecturer is doing is like using big words and pontificating and talking about a subject that could be condensed to 10 or 15 minutes. And she spreads it out over the course of 2 hours. And I think I've received 2 emails from her now, because instead of paying attention, I'm on my laptop, writing something or researching something, on my own time. So it's kind of difficult to rationalize, like, still being in school when information is free, and we can sort of talk about this, but, if you guys have read The Price of Tomorrow by Jeff Booth, that sort of changed my worldview. You know, technology is naturally deflationary, right? Thus, the fact that, you know, education, the price of it is going up despite all information being free, it's kind of nonsense. And I used to look at that and scoff because I would see the value of a degree more and more. But now that I'm on the flip side of it and I'm doing, you know, I'm learning a lot more in my available time than I am at school, sort of begs the question, you know, why on earth are we paying exorbitant amounts to learn things we could otherwise learn for free? So,
man, that's interesting. So I want to go back on the business side of things, because you said, I think the other day, you were running a painting company, correct?
correct, yeah.
Were you guys doing residential or commercial painting?
Yeah, so we were doing residential. The second year, I tried to do one bid for a commercial job, but it was in like the $200,000 territory, and there was a lot of lead paint involved, which you know, is very extensive prep work involved in order to remove lead paint from a house. Obviously, it's a neurotoxin; it's outlawed, and so that didn't pan out. But yeah, no, mostly residential stuff. You know, basically, I worked through a company called Collegiate Entrepreneurs. You know, you're basically equipped with a mentor to, you know, guide you through the year and creating your business plan, you know, going and executing on your marketing plan, things like that. So the first and second year, my first year was really getting my feet wet, figuring out what I sucked at, seeing if I had the capacity to run my own business. And then after I had a successful first year, I figured out that, hey, wait a minute, I can bet on myself and win. And so every time I bet on myself, I would just take my winnings, put the chips, go all in on myself again. And it's paid off so far. And being this young, granted, like I have the ability to take more risk. I got a good set of parents in my corner to support me in case, you know, something goes horribly wrong. But it's yeah, no, it was definitely a cool experience. And you know, residential house painting is definitely something that puts some hair on your chest for sure.
Nice, man. That's really cool. So it's interesting. So Griff got an economics degree. I got my degree in marketing. Your finance and economics. How have your experience within the business world, running your own business, and your experience with what you've learned and what you know now about Bitcoin? How does that contrast or maybe complement what you're learning in the classroom today as far as economics and finance goes? That was actually one question we had from actually another viewer named Joe. That sent in a bunch of questions, and Griff and I were talking about him yesterday, and that was one that was like, oh, that is interesting. You know, like what is the landscape of the classroom like today? Of course, Griff and I are a couple of years removed from college at this point, and so I was like, that's a good question. I have no idea. So, do you have any thoughts on that, or have you really seen much? Or
for sure. So that's a really good question, Nick, actually. The landscape of the classroom today is definitely not what it was like 5 years ago. I didn't even go to college 5 years ago, but that's as much as I can, you know, what I can certainly tell you. 2019, which was the year I first started going to college, obviously, in the spring of that year, you know, the world turned upside down with COVID, right? You know, even prior to COVID, the discourse was in college, you definitely had to tread lightly. You know, they're like the ideas you can openly talk about are very minimal, right? There have been instances, and I won't necessarily go into detail, where, you know, some of the classes I'm in and some of the things I'm trying to talk about in particular, you know, don't lead to a conversation, whereas topics that are very forced and clearly unnatural, and clearly students may not want to discuss something like this, are really encouraged, right? With something like academia right now, and I don't want to tread off the beaten path, because I'll definitely, you know, I'll circle this back around. This is, you know, that my train of logic is a little bit wavy right now. But
hey, I'm following so far.
For sure, yeah. So when a huge entity like the government has the ability to guarantee loans, you know, for more students than they ever have before, basically everybody, right? You know, every Jack and Sally can go and get a loan guaranteed for themselves and go to school, right? When you see something like that happening, A, you have an over-homogenization of students in the university, right? So it naturally drives up prices. And B, the professors have no incentive to instruct on recent, relevant, or important material, right? Some do out of the goodness of their heart because they're professors. That's what they love to do. They love their job. But when you completely misalign the incentive structure for people to come to your university, right, which is we have a great, basket of professors, a great educational program, and you supplement that with guaranteed ability for students to go there, what you naturally get is a poor education, right? Lackluster. So even the school that I'm going to now, I'm, paying a decent chunk of change for it. I will say I do have some good professors and I have had a decent experience here. But overall, it's very visible, the decline. I have taken the things that I've learned in the classroom to some degree and, applied them in my business, as well as, working in the Bitcoin sphere. I'd be remiss if I was saying that, some of the economics, topics and some of the financial things I've learned haven't bled directly over into the stuff I've written or the stuff I've done on Twitter. But like the overwhelming majority of it has come in the last year where I've, been spending time studying on my own.
It is kind of interesting. School, when me and Nick went to school, we went to Albany, and our economics degree, it was exactly the same thing. Basically, nothing was current events. Everything was old news like the entire time. And it was kind of difficult to I don't know, as a young person, it's kind of difficult to sit there and learn about something that happened about 10 or 12 years ago. And the professor, like you said, has a 2-hour lecture, and it could be as we know now with YouTube and Twitter, it could be like a thread or 10 minutes. But I think that's interesting to kind of get into this Bitcoin stuff. When I got into Bitcoin, I thought it was just amazing. You really do have to do some research, and not just kind of research about, you can't just read the white paper and be like, oh, I understand Bitcoin. You do have to have some kind of imagination and some creativity in your economic mind, which I think, I don't know who said this, but Bitcoin kind of has turned economics into a bit of a science, even though it already is, with the way that they've been treating money for the past 100 years. So kind of getting into it, I would love to talk about some of your articles, and I know Nick probably has some good notes. And which one would you want to talk about first, Nick? But I want to get into this Bitcoin stuff and hear what you have to think, because sitting in school, I would, if I was where I'm at today and I was in school, I would have left. I played football and I was on scholarship, and I would have left, just because I'd have been so tired of listening to the outright bullshit that these guys are just spewing every single day. I think Nick knows how much fun I had at Albany. While I did learn a lot, my last economics class that I got my degree with was from a 5th-year PhD who failed his PhD classes and then was teaching us and failing everybody. So everybody's just failing and then grades. And I'm just like, so nobody knows anything. And maybe it's because economics and money is a science that really hasn't been fundamentally messed with enough by people for a long, long time. And Bitcoin kind of is that innovation that's, I don't know, kind of getting money out of the dark ages, you could kind of say. But which one would you want to talk about first, Joe or Nick? I like both. I only read the second one, but I would love to talk about both of these articles.
What about Joe? What are some of your and we had talked about it a little bit, and we need to have I think we need to do a full episode where we just talk about what are the non-negotiable pieces of Bitcoin that must be true for it to be what we all believe that it is, right? So what are some of your foundational beliefs in why Bitcoin? Why do we need it? And I'll refer back to Bitcoin is revolutionizing global money management. That was I don't know if that was the first or second article that you wrote, but you mentioned the SWIFT system in there, which is really interesting, right? Because when we talk about, I would imagine that when we talk about why Bitcoin, it's more so for the future, right? And I think that it's more so for the future because we do have issues within our current system. I don't know, what are some of your foundational beliefs, and why are they foundational beliefs as far as where we're at today and moving forward into the future with SWIFT in mind, and maybe explain what SWIFT is.
For sure. Yeah. So I'll explain what SWIFT is, and then this is actually, a sort of a great talking point. And then I'll talk about the difference between sort of Bitcoin, the network, and Bitcoin, the asset, and then talk about what I think the immutable process, or not immutable necessarily, but like sort of unchangeable, foundations of Bitcoin are and should be, right? So SWIFT, right, in very layman's terms is the basically the existing communication infrastructure between world banks, right? Basically what that means is obviously every single bank uses a ledger system, right? Debiting from accounts and crediting to accounts, et cetera, et cetera. No bank is actually sending physical dollars, right? Basically all fiat money is on a digital ledger, right? So with Swift, essentially, not only is it communications infrastructure incredibly obsolete, right? When you have to wire transfer money, let's say, if I was trying to transfer money to something like Canada, right? 3 to 5 business days, that's nonsense. I could drive to Canada in an hour and a half and hand deliver my money faster than that. In a digital age where information is accessible at the click of a button, and it might sound cliche, but we need a money that can be transferred instantaneously at almost no deadweight loss. When I say deadweight loss, I mean intermediaries taking these huge chunks of transaction fees. You can think of Swift as basically your money bouncing from bank to bank to bank to bank to bank. Essentially, if you want to analogize it like driving all the way across the United States and having to stop for gas, each one of those gas stations represents a bank that your money basically bounces between, which is pretty archaic in the grand scheme of things. Wow. And so layer 2 technologies like the Lightning Network basically take this asset that's more of a store of value tank like Bitcoin, right? If you want to think of it as like a relatively heavy tank, not necessarily incredibly efficient for like massive settlement volume. Something like the Lightning Network allows you and I, right, to open up a payment channel and transact between us, and also bouncing between hundreds of other, hundreds of the other channels that are on the network. And basically what's cool about Lightning is that your transaction is incentivized to run through the cheapest, channel, right? So the more channels that open up, the more people who are charging lower, transaction processing fees, the more competitive it becomes. So, with the, I guess, network effect of the Lightning Network, that's going to become increasingly cheaper. So whereas you have something like Swift, where the barrier to entry, you can't become part of the Swift system if you're not a world bank, right? So that's already out, right? The barrier to entry is literally running a Lightning node. That's it, right? And as consumer solutions become more easy, right, they become more adopted. Something like the Lightning Network, where you're leveraging all these existing channels to make payments between people incredibly cheap and almost instantaneously, right? It's sort of leaving absolutely in the dust, this Swift system where you're bouncing from large institution to large institution. So that's a little bit about Swift. I don't know if you guys want to chime in before I dive into.
I just feel silly because I read the other one and now I wish I read that one. So Swift is that the only like operating system for these banks? Like, is there anything that competes with Swift to try and lower these fees or make it faster? Or is it really just a monopoly on, I mean, like whoever runs Swift is really raking it in like that. Like they really have all the benefits. Because I work in healthcare, and a lot of these hospital information obviously is a very protected thing. It's incentivized, right? Like there's all kinds of, Epic would be one of them, where hospital systems like IDNs or GPOs will all have their information on a singular one, right? So that these insurances, they can communicate kind of easier and get their money a little bit faster with reimbursement and coding. But other hospitals might be on a different system. So at least there is something in healthcare that, is competing with an Epic or something like that. So there's nothing that really competes with Swift. It's just Swift or die basically in the central banking world. And we all are just kind of living by that old technology and their ledger system and everything like that. Is that how that works?
Yeah, essentially. And that's sort of the mic drop moment, right? You think in something that would actually emulate a free market, there would be competitors. You just described it yourself, right? If one line of code or protocol to process things is inefficient in some way, then the market naturally tends towards the more efficient one. But in something like Swift, right? Basically in this this Belgian.
We might have lost them for a second, but can I just say, Nick, this makes me extremely bullish. like the Lightning Network just has to compete against Swift. I mean, let's be honest. That has to be probably one of the easiest competitions that there's going to be in, I don't know, like a business competitive sense. But as Joe kind of gets back on here, I mean, he's a pretty impressive dude, like being this young. I wish my mind was kind of focused on some of the stuff that he's focused on here.
Dude, I mean, we talked about it, I think in the first episode. I mean, you started like a year before I did. And then I jumped back in, I jumped into the Bitcoin world like a year and a half after you, right? And at the time I was 24, and here this guy Joe is 20 years old, still in college, running his own business. I mean, that's really cool. Hey, so to finish up, or maybe to hit on one other piece before we continue on this, listen to this quote here. Griff, you didn't read this one here, but listen to this one. Having your money hot between hundreds of intermediary banks, each taking a sliver of your transfer for processing fees, culminating in a multi-day journey, is old news. What I just described might have sounded like science fiction written in 1922, not the global bank transfer standard in 2022. That's a direct quote from your boy Joe Consorti there. That's a powerful statement there. I was reading these last night and I was sharing it with my family and stuff, and one my mom's husband Joe, it's actually who sent in the questions. He was like, "Oh, wow, like we like to talk about some of this stuff." And I mean, talk about a quote, huh? I mean, sounds more like science fiction than the global system for transfers and everything, whatever the exact wording was in 2022. I mean, that's pretty wild, to think about that.
Yeah, my shout out to Robert Consorti, my dad. He actually helped me with the phrasing on that one. Yeah, no, it's actually embarrassing if you think about it, how little innovation has occurred in this space, because there literally is no competition, right? When it comes to state-owned money, and this sort of goes for everything that the state tries to do, and I don't know if we want to delve too incredibly into that. The abject failure that has been state managed states, right, centrally planned economies for the last century. Yet especially in my college town, you still have people openly advocating and being very big proponents of these things. It's very telling, right? And the fact that Bitcoin has completely come in and usurp this large, incredibly efficient system, all through the free market, right? People are scared of Bitcoin's volatility. Well, it's because that's the first ever instance of a free market, right? It's not operating from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. or 9 to 4:30, whatever the hours are, 9:30 to 4. I can't recall. I did day trading 2 summers ago. I lost a lot of money. It's you don't have the developers of Bitcoin convening at the Bitcoin Foundation to talk about how they're going to switch from proof of work or proof of stake. Like, Bitcoin isn't manipulated by these huge entities, and so people are so there's a bit of a culture shock in seeing the first sort of asset and market that isn't manipulated by a central authority. But eventually it'll be adopted more widely, and hopefully become one of the global systems for remittance payments.
Here's another thought for you. So kind of talking about this idea, right? This polarizing shift from a fiat standard, the entire system that we operate on today, to then a Bitcoin standard, right? And it's such a polarizing thing. There's so many people that are 100% bulls on the new technology, right, of blockchain and how that can work within our current financial system. And then there's people that are like, the Peter Schiffs of the world that are, there's no intrinsic value. This is only a bubble. It's always going to go to zero, right? That's what their statements and their stances always are. But it's interesting. So again, reading another quote from one of your articles. So, like Bitcoin, Swift uses a ledger system to record balances across its network. Swift simply transfers messages. And my thought on that is, do you mean to tell me that Bitcoin isn't so different from the current system, right? Because you get into it in a little bit more detail in the article, but you talk about, with central banks, with the Swift system, transferring economic value or money across geographical spans. All they're doing is saying, hey, here's $50. It's for this guy. Hey, send it over here. Okay. And then the next guy does the same thing, and the next guy, right? However many intermediaries there are. Bitcoin seems to be not so much different there. What do you think? Because it's still a ledger system, right? Obviously, there's some core differences there, right? But what are your thoughts on that?
For sure, yeah. So essentially, both are messaging systems. When you want to get down to it, there are a couple of there's one key difference that I have in mind, and that's you can't change what's on the ledger of Bitcoin within reason. I mean, you could, and I'll describe how. Whereas because the ledger is run for Swift across, if you want to think of all the computers that process the transaction, the nodes, you can essentially go back into the ledger and change transaction history, right? So with something like Bitcoin, right? Obviously, we know. Well, I'll sort of describe how a Bitcoin transaction works. So essentially, let's say that I have one UTXO, right? It just means unspent transaction output. That represents my Bitcoin, right? Let's say it's one Bitcoin. If I want to send you half a Bitcoin, right? What happens is, every 10 minutes, I'll enter into the mempool for the next set of transactions, and every 10 minutes, as the new block is mined and my transaction gets, sent across all the nodes to verify it. Basically, I'm sending you my entire UTXO, and then you're sending me back change, right? So basically, the way that works is I'll end up with a new UTXO, right? And you end up with a portion of mine, right? That's essentially how it works. Like I'm giving you, X dollars, you're splitting it and giving me the change. Same exact deal here. So basically, that's how Bitcoin transactions work. In essence, I won't claim to be an expert. I may have described that poorly, but with something like Swift, you can essentially just go back into the ledger and change transactions. With the hash rate on Bitcoin expanding every single day, which just represents new miners coming onto the network, putting more terahash and making the hash functions more difficult, every difficulty adjustment, that just means the network's all the more secure, right? And as long as the economic incentive remains in place for people to come onto the network and be honest and mine Bitcoin blocks, right? There's nobody in their right mind who would say, I'm going to come onto the network, I'm going to expend more computing power than the network, right? Usurp at least 51% of the power to go back and change the entire ledger history so I could change one transaction, right? It's the power of incentives is very palpable. There have been attacks on Bitcoin, and so long as these incentives exist, Bitcoin will continue to persist.
Yeah, that was a really good explanation of kind of how I mean, like probably our viewers, I think at this point are still kind of new to Bitcoin, so that might be a little bit over most of their heads. But Bitcoin mining and the node system and how the proof of work system works is like to somebody who gets into Bitcoin and then you have all these questions. I mean, like you don't even have to understand obviously cryptography a ton to understand kind of everything that Joe just went over, but I think like the biggest fear to everybody is like, it's this third party autonomous system, like what could happen? Like, everybody trusts these central banks. They trust their banker, which, I find to be so odd, but because I've never trusted a banker in my life. I hate banks at this point, but it's really interesting how, I don't know. It's just interesting how like that whole hash system and how nodes are going to work, how it's going to just play out over time. I mean, would you say that the Lightning Network, and this is what we were talking about as when you froze just a bit ago, would you say the Lightning Network versus Swift is like what? Like we're talking about Netflix versus Blockbuster, like in terms of how fast like they're probably going to overtake, one's going to overtake the other, or do you think this is going to take some time for people to understand, how to operate these nodes and run a business, and obviously just take on your own transactions and not obviously like trust the third party? And, or do you think business owners and people in general are going to be enticed to obviously not lose money to all these transaction fees and the Swift system and kind of how the old system works? What do you think about that? Like how fast do you think this adoption is going to happen?
For sure. So I won't go into the technicality of it, because I won't claim to be an expert on Lightning or the way it works. Those guys are geniuses. They're putting in a whole bunch of work every day. But one thing I will say is it's almost similar to a business, right? If you think about it. So in my mind, there are two major hurdles into Lightning becoming more widely adopted. The first one would have to be on-ramps, right? Obviously, being simplistic for a consumer to run a node is pretty important, right? Because if less people run a node, then process transactions, right? And that becomes an ongoing trend. Now the network has less points of failure. And because of that, what you have is people who can, charge high transaction fees. Then all of a sudden, the Lightning Network might not be as enticing, right? So more consumer on-ramps that are pretty intuitive for them to set up and run their own node, open channels on their own. That's pretty significant, right? So that's one of the first hurdles that people have to climb over. And then the second hurdle is just understanding the concept, right? In order for somebody to jump from, something like doing a traditional wire transfer through like Western Union or something, to using something like the Lightning Network with a cool, API, something like Strike. Jack Mahler's is absolute legend. I've got Strike on my phone. I put basically 100% of my paycheck in there. It's a very innovative system. And basically it's an API that uses a Lightning Network to allow cross-border remittance payments across Bitcoin rails, right? So like I have dollars, I want to send, somebody else dollars in a foreign country. I use the Lightning Network to auto-convert my dollars to Bitcoin. It zooms it across cyberspace, and then automatically sells for dollars. Things like that, there need to be more of them. But also just understanding
hard though. I would say Strike's kind of made it hard to compete with them because it's literally almost as close to zero it's going to get. And obviously that was Jack Mahler's idea when he created Strike, and he's kind of set, I guess, like the precedent or the standard within like kind of the Lightning Network and like this new remittance payment, global payment system community. But yeah, it's kind of interesting how somebody will compete with that. Like zero is pretty good, like, or as close as Strike is to zero. I'm the same way. It's cool to hear somebody on the other side of the country say that they have Strike and that they love it and they're talking about it too, because you kind of feel lonely as a Bitcoiner at this point in time. Like I literally got so many people hooked up on Strike, or so many people hooked up on like, hey, this is the Lightning Network, or hey, it's really this simple. And they're like, nah, like they don't like believe it, or you know what I'm saying? It's so weird. Like I'm just like, this doesn't make any like, but at the same time, I do have to recognize, Joe's been sitting in these college classes of, if you're at a big university, hundreds of kids. If you're at a small university, like 20 to 30 kids. And Joe's probably one of 30. And, I hope the numbers are getting, kind of maybe 5 and 30 that actually do their own research and understand what's going on and are interested in something new. And I think it'll be interesting to see how the Lightning Network, like companies like GETTR and kind of get people hooked up to getting Lightning nodes and start processing transactions, how they're going to start doing it. It's just crazy to me when you're talking about Swift and the banking system, how it's been like that for so long. And I hear in the back of my head Michael Saylor talking about, I think my favorite what is money with Breedlove like segment he was talking about is how somewhere during like the Romans or the Greeks or whatever, like somebody came and pillaged them, or they eventually like took them over and they destroyed all their structures that had globes. And so then entered the dark ages for humans because everybody thought their world was flat, even though there was already a civilization that had figured out the world was not flat. It's like with money, it almost feels like as much as, as kind of sideways as the world seems right now, it kind of almost seems like, we could either be entering one of those dark ages or we could be coming out of one with Bitcoin. I don't know what you guys think about that, but I kind of think, Bitcoin is hope. I know some people say that, but it truly is, because we're talking about a financial system that, one, this is great. Global remittance payments, being able to send money all over the world for free, great. I think about it, these Lightning nodes, being able to run a business anywhere in the world, separate from a nation state and still participating in a global economy. I think that is what is so unique about this. I think that's what I'd love to talk about, and like where the world is going to go with that, because we are getting into a more globalized society, and people, I'm a young guy. I love America, but at the end of the day, I care about my people. I care about kind of what I'm doing. I care about my entrepreneurship. I don't really feel like our state has anybody's back under the age of 30. Let's just be honest. They don't care. They've already printed the money and said so. So I kind of think the Lightning nodes and how that system works is going to give, I don't know, it's going to change the whole game, because now all of a sudden you don't really need to attach yourself to a state or to anything to participate in the economy. And that's kind of lead itself into more of a globalized society, more businesses, more competitive nature of kind of everything. Because once you have access to that financial system, Isn't that all you really need? Isn't that all these third world countries are waiting for, is just the ability to kind of attach themselves to the economy? Or, you know,
it's really wild to think too, like, you know, thinking back on, you know, because I think, Joe, some of the pieces you were hitting on there, as far as we got to have more on-ramps for people to use and utilize the services, right? I mean, this is like the internet in the 90s, you know, like, I mean, how many people like really understood and knew how to utilize the internet to its full potential? Or even think of, you know, back a little further in the Industrial Revolution, right? I mean, if you were just a regular Joe out on the town, and you were you know, you were looking for some type of machine to help you with your business processes. Somebody was like, yeah, here, you can use this. And then they charged you a ton of money just to teach you how to use it. I mean, that's kind of the area that we're in right now, where people it's there, the technology's there, but like people don't know how to use it. You don't know what it is. And it's interesting, right? Because all three of us have taken the traditional academic, you know, finance and economic classes. And Griff and I were talking about this, I think, in our first, maybe the second episode, but it wasn't until we had left school and got into Bitcoin and started learning Bitcoin. And inherently, whenever you learn it, you have to go back to understand, like, okay, wait a minute, like, okay, this is kind of cool. It's the future. Okay, where are we at now? What do you mean it's the future? Like, why do we have to go to a new future? And it's interesting because, I mean, I know that for sure for myself, like, I didn't know what money was, but I had taken all your basic economic classes. I'd taken a banking economics class, right? And so it's like, okay, well, you know, we've got all these people that are old, young, somewhere in the middle, that don't have any idea what even money is supposed to be, right? I mean, and I think one of my foundational beliefs is that money is backed by time, labor, and it is a representation of economic value, right? You put in X amount of hours or time or capital or whatever it is into something, and you're creating economic value. That's what money is supposed to represent, right? It's a medium of exchange, right? At some point, we can talk about different elements, but I mean, that's an interesting piece there when you talk about the barriers to not barriers to entry, but barriers to use, right? Your regular people out there that don't really understand it yet, haven't put the hours of research in to understand it, right? And it really is at this point. I mean, you have to allocate time to looking into it, reading things, listening to podcasts, watching YouTube videos, interacting with cool people like Joe on Twitter. You know, like, you have to put in that time, or else you don't understand it, because there's so many different facets. I mean, most people probably don't know what money is.
Yeah, so I think a cool way to think of this is, I mean, we talk about the concept of gradually then suddenly, which basically just describes S-curve adoption, right? You know, you've witnessed this along basically every major shift in the way that we use new technologies around us. You know, the home television, the microwave, the gas stove. Every one of these, you know, had a few, I won't say fringe, but I guess niche, like households and people using these. And the people that were using these, like, you knew all of the ins and outs, right? I'm sure the first few owners of a gas stove could tell you every single part of a gas stove and exactly what it did, right? But over time, because you went exponential in terms of the people that were using it, not everybody knew exactly what the ins and outs were. And that's essentially every technology we've adopted. I can tell you personally that, like, new computing technologies that come out, like, I'm all over it. My dad's worked in, you know, he's a CTO now. He's been in tech his whole life. So I've been building computers from a young age. I can certainly tell you what things are and how things work, but the average consumer can't, right? If you asked, you know, for example, you know, an average person, like, how this, you know, video game controller work, they wouldn't be able to describe it to you. And the same deal goes for everything that experiences, you know, that parabola in S-curved adoption. And the same thing will happen with Bitcoin. All people need to know that use Bitcoin, right, that are, you know, hopping on the train, and ideally in the next couple, you know, 5 to 10 years, I think half a decade is a pretty good time frame for when we're going to experience this huge exponential growth. All I need to know is that Bitcoin is trustless money, right? Like Griff alluded to earlier, we've been placing our trust in these bureaucrats and these institutions, and we won't go too heavily into that if we don't need to. But, at the end of the day, Bitcoin, you don't need to trust anybody. You can trust the power of incentives, right? Why do you go to work? Because you receive a paycheck. Why do Bitcoin miners secure the network? Transaction fees and the block reward, which is transaction fees and newly minted coins, but also to secure their transactions, right? As long as those incentives exist, they're good to go. What are the incentives with central bankers, right? Try to get, or at least with politicians, try to get elected again, spin the narrative on whatever's happening in the economy, anything that's going wrong, throw some money at it because they have the, unimputable power to print it. And so it's like, okay, if you view, the central bank as a system you have to place your trust in, Bitcoin is a system you don't have to place your trust in. And that's basically it. And then also knowing that the supply is fixed, right? So there can't be any more of it created, which means your wealth will just go up over time. I guess those are the things that the average consumer will probably know or needs to know. And then there's some people who won't even know that. Bitcoin is sort of cool. I can pass this off to one of you guys, but it's not a violent revolution, right? By any means. We're sort of sitting here chatting about the future of money very casually. But over time, as this becomes more widely used, as it shifts from store of value to medium of exchange through things like the Lightning Network, people will sort of just naturally adopt it, right? They won't be forced to. There won't be any coercion involved because we're not a central bank, right? We're just we're just a bunch of people talking on the internet, but they'll naturally begin using it because it will become the standard over time.
I think when we were talking on the phone the other day, one of my favorite things you said is that Bitcoin is truly the only scarce asset that the world has ever seen. Like it is the only asset that we've ever had, the only commodity we've ever had, however you want to phrase it. It's one of one. So it's very hard to kind of go around and talk about it to people and just kind of categorize it and go, oh, it's an investment, usually is what it boils down to at the end of the day, because most people are just so dollar preferenced. But I thought it was really interesting how we also talked about gold, right? Is like thought of as this extremely scarce asset, great form of money. But no, it's not. Like, it's really not like a great form of money. It's really not that scarce. It's really not that hard to fake it. And it really has caused the world quite a few problems. I know everybody talks about Bitcoin fixes this. What would you guys, or Joe, what would you say? What would you say Bitcoin fixes first? Or what do you think the most important thing Bitcoin can fix? Do you think it's these $0 global remittance payments? Do you think that globalizing an economy is good? Do you think that moving away from centralized nation states is going to be a good thing? Do you think that Bitcoin can do that by just changing what money is? Or do you kind of think that this is just going to be a better banking system and then we can hush up? Because I don't think that, but some people think that this is a very simplistic thing. And me and Nick are literally on episode 2, and then probably next week on episode 3, and probably for the next few weeks on episode 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 on what Bitcoin is or what it could potentially be. You know what I'm saying? And I'd love to hear from you on what you think Bitcoin fixes and why that's important for not just Americans, but just people in general, like how this is going to help the world.
For sure. I'll say what I think, and then I'll pass the torch off to Nick. I think more than anything, like to boil it down, to bring it back to first principles, right? Bitcoin is the only thing ever conceived that actually can capture value in an asset, and capture it accurately. To go back way back when we were using marbles and rhinestones, obviously money, right? When you were using those forms, it just fixes the coincidence of wants, right? I'm a caveman. I'm naturally a hunter. I kill a woolly mammoth with my bare hands and, eat their raw organs, but I have no use for the tusks. I want to exchange the tusks with somebody else. But, maybe they don't want the tusks, right? Maybe what I can do is, maybe I want, let's say I want to exchange the tusks with somebody and I want, cloth in return. They don't have any cloth. What they do have are these marbles, right? These marbles represent a certain amount of value, and we'll exchange those marbles with my tusks at a rate that we agree upon, right? That's what money is. It's just the storage of value derived from something else, right? That's what a store of value is. And so I think with, fast forwarding, thousands of years into the future, where we stand today, right? This is yet another, and we've had many examples throughout history of money being diluted. This is just another example of money being diluted over time and losing its value. Right? If you were to go back in time to the 50s, right, where a milk driver could support his entire family off of his salary alone, and you told him that you're making $180,000 this year, and you can barely afford a 2-bedroom suite in Queens, New York, right, or Midtown Manhattan, you know, he'd be absolutely astonished, right? Those were the rates that the penthouses on Park Avenue were going for at that time, right? So this increasing dilution of somebody's dollars, right, their wealth stored in dollar terms, Bitcoin is sort of the exit out of the burning theater, right? You know, the value of people's labor, the value of people's wealth in real terms is crumbling around them. And with something like gold, you know, if the price for gold goes up, people can, you know, increase gold mining, they can flood the supply, the price stabilizes, right? It's that simple. And, you know, Peter Schiff can wax poetic about why rock's shiny, therefore value. But at the end of the day, you could find it on, you know, you could find it on asteroids. And again, this concept of absolute scarcity is something that humans have a tough time grasping, just like we have a tough time of grasping infinity or a tough time at grasping the afterlife. But, you know, being able to store your value in something that is absolutely scarce, it's sort of a race to accumulate, right, at the end of the day. So I think that is what, you know, principally Bitcoin solves, and what I'm most passionate about, the fact that you're protecting your wealth in real terms from an entity which has its vested interest in diluting it to fix its own problems, right? That's what I think. What do you think, Nick?
That was really, I really like that. That was good. Absolute scarcity is something that the world has never seen, and it really is going to change that stuff. I love that milkman example because that's something me and Nick talk about a lot. But Nick, go ahead.
No, I think one piece that you mentioned, and I don't know if there's a name for it, but the idea that, hey, if the value of gold pumps 0.7%, that tweet that I just pulled up, if the value of gold pumps 0.7%, or call it 50, right? It's going to be more profitable for miners to go out and mine more gold, right? So they can expend more capital at that, because if and when they do find more gold, it's going to be a larger value, right? And this is true with any other commodity or asset or good or service. The more valuable that it is, the market is going to flood to create more of that to capture the value, right? And Bitcoin is very interesting in this sense, because that's the one thing that actually cannot happen, right? And so then you get into the stock to flow ratios, and the halving cycle of the flow, which is I'll tell you what, I tried to explain this to somebody the other day, and it's like you really got to pay attention and think critically about it. But you also have to have some prior knowledge in how it all works. But the stock being the existing supply, and the flow being the additions of new supply, right, of new Bitcoin. If we're thinking about existing stock of Bitcoin, the flow would be new Bitcoin being added into total supply. That flow drops by half every about 4 years, right? 210,000 blocks. It drops by half, in that the flow is exponentially decreasing, right? So which in turn creates the stock, or the current supply becomes increasingly fixed, right? And that is an interesting thought that no other commodity or asset or good or service can do, right? And so you talk about the store of value element of it. Right now, it's strange, because you look at, you know, people talk about, oh, the volatility, you know, how could it be a store of value if it's so volatile, right? And I had written a little piece about this, Joe. I don't know about you, but I know for myself, trying to formulate my ideas and things that I've read and kind of come up with my own opinions, the only way that I can really do that in a concise manner is if I write it out. And so I like to, Griff and I and one of our other friends, Nico, we've got a shared note that we'll go in there and we'll just like type stuff up and we'll just share about it. We'll talk about different stuff. But the volatility argument, right? Like people talk about, it couldn't be a medium of exchange or a store of value because it goes up and down so much. Well, compared to what, right? That's if it's denominated in dollars. And so it's really kind of interesting. You think about like what the end game for Bitcoin is. I mean, if everything is always into perpetuity denominated in dollars, well, then I mean, how does Bitcoin work in that world, right? Like in my mind, the end game for Bitcoin is a Bitcoin standard, right? We use Bitcoin as a store of value and as the medium of exchange, the world reserve currency, right? It should take that position because it truly is the hardest form of money, right? You can't forge it. We talked about this in detail and in depth in the store value and medium of exchange episodes. So go check those out if you're a little lost in the sauce here. But I mean, those pieces are really interesting. But I got to ask you, Joe, because I know that Griff and I spent, a couple hours at a time on the phone for I don't know how many weeks and or months, as I was starting to learn these things, and he had already looked into a lot of it. And so as I'm going through, like in the very beginning of my Bitcoin journey, I'm like, holy shit, is this true? And he's like, yep, yeah, that's true. Yeah. Go check this out. Go check this out. And he'd give me some, he'd go down the rabbit hole. And now, I've gone down the entire rabbit hole. I say the entire, there's still tons to learn, right? That's all we're doing here is just trying to think about ideas and trying to think things through, trying to figure stuff out. But so Griff was my guy that I was like talking to, right? I was learning this alongside him. And I think at this point, we're both now learning alongside each other and having a fun time with it. But it definitely gets boring because he's in Sacramento, California. I'm in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I don't have a whole lot of people here that I see on a regular basis that are Bitcoiners, And so I got to ask what your experience is like with that, because I'm sure you've got friends and family that are like, dude, we're tired of hearing about this. We don't care, and you're like, it's a revolution. It's so important,
For sure, yeah.
So what is your experience with that?
Yeah. I won't dox anybody or name anybody by name, but there are a couple of people who are good friends of mine who I knew in person before, they got crazy into Bitcoin and they initially introduced me. And now they're huge talking heads in this space. I won't name specifically who because I don't want to dox people, but sort of those guys were my confidants in a lot of this. And then naturally what ended up happening was because of my level of interest and also me texting back and forth, talking to these guys and knowing them, probably, I mean, we're both passionate about it, but I like asking a lot of questions. I naturally started talking to my dad about it, right? And he, of course, he's coming up on 60, let's see here, 61 this year. So happy early birthday to him. He watched the Apollo 11 when he was 8 years old. That's how I know how old he is. 1961, 1969 is when we landed on the moon. 1961, easy. Anyway, basically me naturally talking to him about it. He's getting up there, turning 61. He's worked very hard for the last, as long as I can remember. We used to live in California. We moved to Massachusetts, the 20 minutes north of Boston. And naturally, like, he's been working hard all his life. He's always had to do some form of side hustle, some form of computer thing on the side in order to provide for us. And then I started talking to him about this, and the whole mining aspect really got him intrigued, because wait a minute, you're telling me I can basically monetize my ability to get cheap electricity and run computers, and provide cash flows for myself without having to, sell or repair people's MacBooks on the side in addition to my job. Okay. And so basically, him and I, we allocated a lot of our existing capital into miners. And now we're mining, and that's supplementing his income, and it's making the grid in our town more robust by a fraction, but more robust if you want to think about it. And so he's definitely a confidant of mine that I call and talk with him about current affairs. And it's pretty cool having a person in the family who's wicked tech savvy, and into this stuff. And it's cool because if you want to think about it, it all started with, one individual who talked to another guy who talked to me, who now talked to my dad. If you want to think about the spread in terms of not only our awareness, but also the income we've been able to generate from that, it's really unreal. And it's revolutionary in that sense, because it's solving a problem we all have. And that problem is how we can take more of our value into the future, right? I don't want to take my cash today and buy a 72-inch TV, because 3 years from now, it's going to be worth less. I don't want to buy a car. I don't have the means to buy a house. I'm not yet raising a family. What asset can I buy that's going to hold its value into the future and appreciate? That's Bitcoin.
Yeah, that's that's so true. And I all the way back to like not the milkman thing and kind of what we were talking about, what you feel like Bitcoin fixes. You know, mining obviously produces a lot of jobs, but Bitcoin in its absolute scarcity, in buying a home, if you wanted to, people can't buy a home. No, regular people cannot buy a home. The milkman today cannot buy a home, and I don't think that is necessarily right. I do think it is obviously a problem with the money that we have in society today. Like the reason why nobody can buy things on a minimum wage is because they can't afford it, because money has been fake, it's been inflated, it's no good. And it's so weird, like to, you know, I don't know how the world's going to go because everybody's argued for years now. And I think it's so funny once you get into Bitcoin, you're like, dude, minimum wage, like, gives a shit. Like that's not like, it doesn't even matter. Like it literally doesn't even matter. Like you want to raise it, great, it's just going to mess like it's going to mess everything else up. Like this absolute scarcity, and obviously giving the people the ability to just run a node by themselves or even mine by themselves, even though that's not going to be probably at this point probably not financially advantageous unless you're going to be one of those lucky guys that gets a hash right and gets a reward, which has happened pretty frequently this
It's
year.
happened 3 times in the last month, which is
Yeah. So
pretty
does that
bananas.
hurt you a little bit? Because do you guys have a pretty decent system and like you guys get some good, like do you guys get rewards regularly, or how does that work?
Yeah, so I don't want to pan to the left and dox myself, but I'm actually mining like right now in my bedroom. I don't want to pan the camera around to show exactly where it's located so somebody breaks through one of my windows and takes them. You know, I haven't I mean, I'm part of a pool. I'm also mining with graphics cards that I have. You know, I have you know, I've been you know, before all of this, before becoming like a de facto book nerd, just reading all the time. Right now, I'm almost done with the Safety In's newest one, the Fiat Standard I got for Christmas. It's been a long time coming. Like I've literally read, you know, like 7 books in the last month. But before that, I was, you know, a huge video game guy, and so I got a lot of graphics cards. So I'm mining with those. One thing I will say is, like we're mining with graphics cards and like flipping Ethereum immediately. Like we're mining Ethereum because we found the most efficient graphics cards for Ethereum. So you know that thing can die for all I care. Obviously, they're 2 separate things. And the cool thing is, like those actually have resale value, unlike like, you know, old miners, which will just become obsolete and then you can't use them for anything else because they're ASICs, application specific, right? Like with graphics cards, sure, somebody's gonna buy my, you know, 5-year-old 3070 when I'm not using it anymore. And so that's partially what we're doing. And I comment real quickly on one of the things you said. You were talking about how minimum wage is sort of this well, I sort of view it as a hilarious concept. Just to go back to the idea of the state being incredibly inefficient at, you know, managing the economy, right? We live in a mixed economy right now. You know, there are all these talking heads on Capitol Hill, and where I live, you know, a certain senator has been, you know, yelling about $15 an hour minimum wage for years now. Guess what? The free market determined $15 an hour for, you know, a de facto minimum wage for the last like 5 years, right? Most jobs around the United States, over 80% of people are getting paid at least $15 an hour. And so it's like, you know, you take a look at that, the free market already decided it. Meanwhile, the bureaucrats are still yelling at each other. And most people, you know, outside with a picket fence have no idea that, you know, it's already $15 an hour. They're working at Starbucks. They're already getting paid, you know, $16.50 plus tips, right? It's sort of it's all a distraction. Once you understand that, like all of that is just really noise, then you can focus on, you know, what's real and tangible, which in my mind is Bitcoin, not to be reductive.
You know, I've been asking this question a lot recently, and I'd love to hear what you guys think too. Are these are our government officials? I mean, like, are these guys that, for lack of a better word, dumb, or is this on purpose? Because they've been screaming about minimum wage since I was a kid, and I obviously didn't have the same thoughts I have now. I was just a kid, whatever, but are they that dumb, or are they playing the game? Are they happy with the current system? Are the people who kind of pull their strings that dumb as well? Like, is Warren Buffett that, like, is Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett, all of these traditional guys, are they that blind to like what the actual economic problem is here? Or do they just lack honestly, just the simple imagination? Because the way I told Nick, the way I got into Bitcoin was literally just reading a Twitter thread you know, and obviously most traditional economists or, you know, somebody who's going to work in the financial system, i.e. a financial advisor or a banker or, you know, anybody who has kind of that LinkedIn reputation, you know, in our world today, are they just blind to the whole thing? Like, I don't, you know, it's kind of like one of these things I've been asking for the last 2 years since I've been studying Bitcoin. I'm like, everybody should want this. It fixes kind of everybody's problem. We can operate on it. There might be some, you know, people who have a lot of malinvestment out there that might get screwed in the process of transitioning over, but you know, poor investment into society at all levels, poor credit at all levels is bad for everybody, not just bad for the individual. So what do you guys think? Do you feel that they're just happy about the game that's being played, or like, are they playing the game, or are they smart enough to see that Bitcoin is about to kind of screw them over? But you know, it's kind of something that I've been asking a lot in the last couple of weeks, because Biden's coming out with more regulation, but Arizona's legalizing it as tender. It's like, there's smart people on both sides. Obviously, Bitcoiners are kind of single issue voters, so it's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out. But I just can't tell if they're dumb or if they just don't want to, or if they don't want to change, because obviously everybody's adverse to change. And changing the way you think about money is a complex it's a complex concept. Thinking like money is not just this dollar and that's it. Most people just see the dollar or the minimum wage and they're like, that's what money is. Like, you know, it's a very like simple term, when if you actually go and study the history of money, or you just study money, you realize that most of our problems today are because money sucks. Like, because it's so good. And I just don't know. Like, I don't know if they just they're not seeing it, they lack the imagination, or it's an actual attack on the people. I'm kind of thinking it kind of is an actual attack on the people to certain levels, but I don't know. I don't know what you guys think. To me, it just seems like it could definitely be an on-purpose situation. But
it's definitely weird to think about that stuff. You know, like they had didn't they have the congressional hearings a couple weeks ago or whenever it was, and they were talking about stable coins and this and that and this and that, right? And I don't know if you guys watched any of that stuff or saw any of the highlights and stuff from it, but it really is crazy. It's like, hey, I'm in charge of all this stuff here. But I'm just going to ask some real dumb questions, and I'm not really going to think much about what the issue is and what maybe a potential solution to that issue is. You know, it just doesn't make any sense. I mean, I'm just a regular dude, and I spent 2-3 months to learn about this stuff, and having spent that time, I'm like, oh, this makes sense. This is okay. You know, I don't know everything, right? I don't know how like the technological part of it works. I don't understand cryptography. But I also don't know how my car works. I don't know how the HVAC system works in my house per se, right? Or the electric system or the internet for that matter, but I'm able to use it, you know? And I think that that's kind of weird, right? Like it seems like a lot of people are like, oh, we don't know how it works. You know, you can't, it's not a tangible physical thing. You don't know how it works. Blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, well then how did you get here today? How did you know, there's
Right.
such an infrastructure that everything has been built upon. And
Do you feel like our leaders in the world today are kind of like that? Like they're just operating the money system that's kind of already been in place when they were kids, and they don't really even, you know, they don't even know. Like it's kind of like,
doesn't make sense.
the moat was already dug. They grew up in that little area, and now they're just like, well, this is all we know, and we can't change. Because that would be interesting. I mean, obviously, if like that's what it is, you know, that's
Yeah. Well, it kind of it's
that's great.
it's kind of like, you know, it seems like they've just put zero efforts into trying to understand what Bitcoin is and how it works, and the issues that it's supposed to solve and the foundations that it's supposed to build upon, right? And it's almost like we don't have, imagine we didn't have any roads, right? There's no interstate highways, there's no roads. It's just maybe dirt paths and just open land, right? And I've got a really nice Corvette sitting here, brand new, right? And they're like, that thing sucks because it can't drive over that hill. And you're like, guys, and I'm sure that you guys would agree, right? The infrastructure for the use of Bitcoin, right? Those on-ramps that you talked about earlier, Joe, there's so few of them, right? The application it's a little clunky, right? I mean, we use Blue Wallet, Griff and I, it's one of the systems we use to store Bitcoin. And if you want to take it out of there, it's a little, you got to send it to an exchange, and then you got to sell it on the open exchange, and then you got your dollars, and then you could transfer it to your bank to then use. It's a little clunky, right? There are still some intermediaries. It's difficult to use, right? And it's similar to I've got a brand new Corvette, and all we've got are dirt and gravel roads, where it's like you can't really use it to its full potential yet. And people are looking at Bitcoin now as the car with only dirt roads, and they're like, oh yeah, that's not the solution. That's not going to work. And you're like, no, this is a great tool. We just have to continue allocating smart minds and money to building that infrastructure, right? And it doesn't make any sense that these people haven't put it. It seems like they just haven't put any thought to it. Because I mean, I don't feel like I'm like some wizard that just understands everything, right? I mean, all I did was put some time into reading some stuff and listening to some podcasts and thinking about some things, and it seems like, I mean, either there's something that we're missing that we just don't we maybe just don't grasp and understand the size of what we're talking about. Maybe there's something that we're missing that would make it to where Bitcoin can't work in the future. But it doesn't quite seem like that.
Yeah, I don't know.
So it all boils down to the incentive structures at the end of the day. The government, their vested interests are in that of keeping the fiat standard alive. What does fiat mean, right? It means by edict, right? I could be throwing that around, but that's the basic meaning, right? So essentially, as opposed to a dollar being backed by gold, right? A dollar used to be a certificate in exchange for a certain amount of gold. Now, a dollar is backed by the good faith and credit of the United States government. What does that mean? That's fiat, right? So why does the government want to retain its hold on fiat? Well, have you seen the amount of debt that we've got? So one of the huge reasons is they want to devalue their debt. How do you do that? Well, you've got a fixed dollar amount for your debt, right? You have to pay people back. It's not like that debt is appreciating, right? Well, there's more being added to it, but it's not like if the debt were to stop climbing, its value would appreciate in real terms. What they do is they inflate the money supply to make their debt valued less, so it's easier to pay, right? It's that simple. There's that, and then also the fiat system sort of it incentivizes kicking the can down the road. If we had a finite source of money, you'd actually have to be a brain and solve problems. But what do people complain about modern day politics? They complain that, either both parties are the same or neither solves anything in a particularly, long-standing manner. That's because the money isn't incentivizing them to do that, right? If we had a real finite supply of money and we had to be austere with the way we were doing things, chances are we wouldn't be toying with the idea of going to war with Russia. Chances are Russia wouldn't be toying with the idea of going to war with Ukraine, right? All of these different things are just a sort of an extension of the fact that you can print money out of thin air to finance virtually anything, right? So decision making is no longer tied to intrinsic value, right? Because you could just throw money at it at the expense of your citizens. That's essentially why it could be the fact that they don't understand Bitcoin, but I'm more of the opinion that they fundamentally understand that Bitcoin poses a threat, as Biden just said, to national security, right? There's going to be a huge war on Bitcoin, specifically because it forces politicians to be responsible with the way they're spending. And that's it.
That's definitely wild. You think about it like from an individual standpoint. You talk about it's more efficient and more effective to borrow and take on the cash flow liability of borrowed money, because then you can create more with not having really anything, right? I mean, obviously depends on the individual as far as how much money you can borrow and what rates that those may be when you talk about an individual level, right? But if you're gonna be a real estate investor, well, you're gonna be probably the most inefficient real estate investor if you only use cash, right? You've got to leverage. If you don't leverage and arbitrage the dollars that you've got, then you're going to be inefficient, right? I mean, if you've got $100,000, you could buy two $50,000 houses for cash, or you could go buy like 10 and put $10,000 down on each of them and leverage your dollars, right? And then use the cash flow in your real estate to then pay for the financing of those. And then over time, you're using other people's money to buy the properties. You're using your renters, other people's money to pay the lending fees your mortgage payment or whatever on that borrowed money. And over time, you're able to pull your own capital out via cash out refinance. And now you've got all the cash you started with and probably more. You've got equity in the properties that you own, and you own those physical properties. I mean, that's talk about the incentive structure, right? You're incentivized to do that. Oh, and all the tax incentives that are built in when you do that, right? You don't pay taxes on loans. You don't pay taxes on loans. And so whenever you, and also the depreciation of a home over, you talk about a 30-year fixed mortgage, I believe you can depreciate the value and the maintenance of your home over 27 years. So you talk about depreciating what you're paying on that, plus you've got income coming in from your renters, and the depreciation and the income typically will offset each other to where you don't really have to pay a whole ton in taxes anyways. You're still gonna have to pay property taxes and certain things like this. There's obviously a ton more elements than what I'm hitting on here, but I mean, it's such a complex system. And, I always like this. My uncle and I've talked about it before. Everybody likes to say, well, basic economics or basic supply and demand says this and this and this. This shit is so far beyond basic economics. It's ridiculous. Where Bitcoin is really interesting is because it is sound money. You do have some of those sound money principles coming back into play, right? Sound economics, basic supply and demand. Those types of things actually work when there is sound money. I mean, I don't know how much research, Joe, you've done on modern monetary theory, but I mean, that shit is weird, huh? I mean, it's not the same as your personal finances, right? You look at the governments, right, as the example of the institutions, right? The government, the federal government of the United States, compared to, any one of us with our own personal budgets. We've got to manage, okay, I've got this much coming in and inflows. I've got this much going out and outflows on a fixed amount, on a monthly schedule. And I've got these expenses that are variable, and I've got X amount free cash flow left over. Now, what do I want to do with this, right? And there's tons of systems that go into that. The government doesn't have to manage their system like that because, Joe, to your point, let's just print some money. We'll just figure it out. We'll print some money, and it's not their money anyways to begin with, right? It'd be like if I got put in charge of Joe's account to manage all of his inflows and outflows and what he does with everything, and I'll just spend money willy-nilly because it ain't my money, right? They're spending the taxpayer dollars. Now we know that technically they're supposed to protect the Constitution of the United States. They're supposed to be working for the people, right? But I think that we're starting to see some issues, one of them being inflation, right? I mean, this is probably the big hot button issue that everybody likes to talk about. But I mean, it's such a complex system, and they've got so many layers to it at this point. It's ridiculous. You kind of mentioned it a second ago, Joe. You talk about, futures and options contracts, any derivatives, right? That adds a whole nother element that doesn't make any sense, right? I mean, we talk about volatility in the markets, right? I mean, what causes anything to go up and down in value? It's market actors buying and selling in the open market, right? If more people buy something and they put more money in that deal, the market cap expands, the value of it in total increases. As more people sell and they take money out, then the market cap decreases and the total value decreases, right? But then, that's pretty basic, right? That's basic supply and demand, basic economics. But then you start adding in derivatives and all that kind of stuff. You start looking at interest rates and different yields from different asset classes. How does Bitcoin compare to real estate or bonds or equities or private investments or lending? It's like there's so many damn elements that it's like, what the hell's going on?
Absolutely. I think the fact that, and I think Safety said it best in his new book, in order to protect your wealth, right? And I'm paraphrasing here, people are forced to become, investors, right? Pseudo investors, as opposed to just being able to earn money and then sit on that money with, without hoping anything, knowing that it's going to store its value. We're forced to, become traders in essence. We're forced to learn how to become realtors on our own. And that's, inflating the everything bubble even more. It's taking away people's valuable time that they would otherwise be, spending, enjoying the fruits of their labor, instead, suffering from the consequences of undisciplined monetary policy.
Wow.
All of this is like, it's crazy how we all like have different kind of I don't know, just little takes here and there on like all of this stuff, but then we kind of all end up at the same issues. Nick, I don't know what more you want to cover. I feel like we've covered quite a few things, but we appreciate your time, Joe. I mean, this has been pretty awesome.
Yeah.
I feel like I've learned a ton. I definitely am going to do more research on Swift now that we had this conversation, because that's just like, that kind of blew my mind, because I feel like in my current job, I literally think about those kind of intermediary systems, and I'm like, man, these things suck. What, why are we still using, like, it doesn't make any sense with how good the internet really is nowadays. It's like, this doesn't make any sense. And maybe it's just because people aren't, obviously they don't have the creative imagination to build new systems, but over time, I think people will. I don't know what you want to wrap it up with, Joe. Where can people find you on social media? Do you have any more articles coming out? What's the next big thing for you? Things like that, whatever you want to let our listeners know. There's not that many yet, but maybe one day there will be. And they will look back on this episode, probably listen to you quite a bit. So let them know.
For sure. Absolutely. Well, you can find me right there at Joe Consorti on Twitter. I post quite a bit on there. Yeah, that's me on the left. I was competing against two firefighters who were twins. A bit unfair if you ask me. You can find me there. I'm always posting new things that I find to be, profound or whatever comes to mind, market updates, things like that, some memes. So follow me on there. What's coming next for me? Well, I'm currently drafting my next piece for Bitcoin Magazine. It's I don't want to give too much away, but essentially it revolves around one of the endless wars that we've been participating since the start of the 21st century, and how Bitcoin could potentially prevent things like that from happening again. So
awesome! I'm excited to read it.
Great stuff. Yeah,
absolutely.
We appreciate you having or hopping on with us, Joe. Everybody, come check us out again. Just like we're sitting here with Joe, we love to talk with people. Find us on Twitter at Nyc Griff Show. We're on Twitter. We love to talk about some stuff. Shoot us a DM. We'd love to talk. Maybe we can have some more people on the show. Find the if you're not watching on YouTube, we are on YouTube as well. It is the Nyc and Griff Show. Check us out. We appreciate you guys listening, and we are looking forward to some more conversations with more fans, more like-minded Bitcoin people. And we hope you guys have a great rest of the weekend and a great week. Looking forward to the next episode.